Hello and welcome back to the Nasty Metal Production channel here at YouTube, and welcome to my top 10 metal albums of 2021. So without further ado, let me get into listing down my top 10. Let's get into it. So before I get into my top 10 list for this video here, I'm gonna run through at least some honorable mentions here. Just albums I thought that were fine that were released this year. For one, Saxon released their covers album Inspiration. I know some people didn't really care much for this release, but I enjoyed it. I thought it was fine. I mean, it's not again. If you're going into this album expecting classic or prime Saxon, you were, I think, if anything, you were setting yourself up a little bit too high. A bit, and I think that's what the overall mind frame you should have been going into for inspirations from Saxon. If anything, you should have treated this album what it is, and that's a covers album. So that's what I looked at, and that's what the mind frame I was going into this album. So I think it was a solid album. So that's why I'm mentioning this one as an honorable mention. So there it is. That's one of them. Band named Conquest released an album this year, and it was their debut. It's titled The Night Goes On, which I thought was a good album, and that they did great with it. So I think it was a solid album from these guys. So there we go. Accept released a fine album this year titled Too Mean to Die. I think, again, it was a fine album. I've seen a lot of people rate this one a little too high. I kind of, at this point, somewhat disagree, because I mean, it's a good album. It's probably a better album than the previous album, but to kind of put it that it's the best since at least the first two is kind of pushing it, because if anything, it doesn't sound anywhere different or from the previous couple of albums. Again, it's just maybe the writing wise and performances is good, but I don't think it's nearly that amazing. But again, I enjoyed it, but I don't think it's the most greatest thing I think Accept have released. So that's where I'm at. And again, Andy Sneap is still the producer. And again, he just makes it like every other fucking Accept album that, since Blood of the Nations. Trance released a good album this year titled Metal Forces. That was good. A Polish death metal or / black metal band, Sarmet, released their debut album RS28. It was given to me from the guys, and I thought it was a really good album, so I'm giving that as a mention here. Rage released a really good album this year titled Resurrection Day. Cannibal Corpse released Violence Unimagined, which I thought was really good. Some Russian thrash metal band by Mystic Storm released a really good album this year too. That's a female-fronted Russian thrash metal band. Portrait released at One With None, and that was a really good fucking album. And that's pretty much it for my honorable mentions, so there we go. It's time to get into my actual top 10 here, so let's get into it. Coming in, number 10 is Senjutsu from Iron Maiden. Now, when it comes to some of the last couple of Iron Maiden albums, they never made it this high. At least we're never really in my top 10 list. Now here it's at number 10, but you know what? I was still at least amazed. I was surprised by the caliber and the quality that Iron Maiden brought to the table here with Senjutsu. I thought it was a great album. I think the production on this album is better than the production and the mixing was on the previous album, The Book of Souls. I think everything just sounds a lot better on here. And I think, I mean, technically I guess you can say that if The Book of Souls had the production of this album right here, maybe it would have been at least somewhat even better than this one. But because of the production and the mixing and just the overall recording of The Book of Souls, to me, I think I put heads and shoulders, this album at least heads and shoulders above The Book of Souls. So that is at least here at number 10. So let's move on. Let's move on to, of course, coming in at number 9 is Dealin' Death from Vulture, their third full-length album here, and it's another solid quality speed / thrash metal album from Vulture. These guys based out of Germany. It's a good album, though I will say that that I don't think it's as good as the previous 3, and yes, that does include Victim of the Blade, their EP, but I think it's still another quality fucking thrash metal album from these guys. It still has some great songs on here, plenty of great bangers. So I think from top to bottom, there's still some really good stuff on this album. So that's all I really can say about it. So let's definitely move on to number 8, which is Preserved in Time from Wheel. Now, this is one of those albums that I wasn't very much familiar with when going into reviewing albums this year, but this is one of those that just took me by surprise. These guys are a doom metal band, but my God, again, they're from Germany, and this is some really fucking quality doom metal. Some really good stuff on this album. It really was one of those that was just surprising to me, and I just ended up really loving this one. It's just great stuff on here, and again, it checks all the boxes for what I look into a doom metal album, and it's just so good. So that's all I can say here. Again, if you want to hear more of my overall thoughts, or just me really elaborating on how I really like Preserved in Time by Wheel, just check out my review of the album. It's here on the channel. Go find it. It's a really good album, and I've got some really good things to say about it, but it just was so good that it really ended up falling into my top 10 list here. So there we go. Let's definitely move on to number 7, which is Into the Storm, the debut album from this Japanese thrash metal band Significant Point. And again, this is probably not the most original album here. Again, it's their first album. Usually it comes off like that, but to be honest, what really kind of took me back on this one and just really, or I would say just surprised me, was just the level of energy and the overall youthfulness, the enthusiasm these guys pretty much had in playing these songs, and you can feel it in the songs and the playing. It's like you can tell the guys are having a blast recording this album. That's why the overall energy is so high on this album, and that's why I think it really just left a really good impression on me, and that's why I really have it pretty high, at least here in the bottom of my top 10 list here. Again, it's at number 7, but it's still at least a good slot for this one, and I was just really impressed, so it's why it's in my top 10 here. So there we go. Again, if you want to hear more of my thoughts on this album, go search out my review for this album from Significant Points. So let's definitely move on to number 6, which is The Trip from Lucifer's Hammer. I remember when I first reviewed some of the really first release, and I think it was an album, and I liked it, but I didn't think it was nearly the most amazing thing. It was from 2016, and it was a solid album, but my God, I wish I at least somewhat kept up and really try and kind of keep up with their albums and where they progress, because of this album is I would say is 10 times fucking better than the really earlier stuff, especially their very first album. I think it's some of the best they've released so far. These guys are a Chilean band, but these guys are so fucking good, and this album right here is some of the best, more, I guess, traditional heavy metal to come out this year. It's so good. Again, from these Chilean guys, again, they're on High Roller Records. Production sounds like it was recorded in the 1980s. It just sounds great. And again, there's a lot of great songwriting. You can tell that they progressed. They've come a long way, and they might be even going even forward. They might be expanding on what they're establishing with their sound here. But it's just this tip-top shape fucking heavy metal, and I love it. So, alright, so we're finally into the top 5 portion of my top 10 list. So coming in at number 5 is Hell Unleashed from Evil. And again, the British thrash metal band, they hadn't released an album since 2013, but they come back this year with, I would say, some of their strongest material. This is really good. At times you can tell they're even mixing in a little bit of some death metal, since they cover a Mortician song. They really push things a little bit on this one for them. I mean, you can kind of hear still a little bit of that Bay Area influence, again, from the likes of at least early Metallica, or at least 80s Metallica, Testament, Exodus, and at least at times Slayer, even though they were always more of an LA band, but they always kind of were really accepted by that. And Death Angel, you can hear that a bit in their sound still, but you can tell they're starting to really take more influences from at least Onslaught. And just those kind of bands where it's like really kind of borders on the more extreme portions of thrash metal. And I think if anything, it just turned out to be some of their strongest material. So I like that. If anything, I just prefer this style over some of the more earlier ones, even though they were fine. But this sound just did something for me more so, and that's why I've got it this high. It was fucking impressive, so there we go. Coming in at number 4 is Game Over from U.D.O, which is, of course, has been Udo Dirk Schneider's band for, since 1987, since he had first left Accept. And, again, it's mostly what you've come to expect from at least his stuff. I mean, it's kind of like at this point almost with Saxon, Motorhead, or of course AC/DC. It's pretty much the overall concept does. You know what you're gonna get, and it's what you've come to expect kind of style. You know, it's what you've come to expect. But goddamn, is it not quality though? It's still every bit of it is great. I mean, the production, though, I don't think is nearly as impressive as some of the other previous albums that he has released since, at least for example, Decadent and Steel Factory, which I thought had some great mixing and production. They sounded fantastic. This one is close, but there's still a bit of an anemic quality to it. And again, I elaborate a little bit on this anyways, or at least on this in my review for Game Over from U.D.O, but still, I think it's another very impressive album. There's just nothing bad on this album, so that's all I can say there. It's just great stuff, so that's what I got at number 4. So I'm just going to move on because I've already elaborated a lot on that album, so there we go. Coming in at number 3 is Torn Arteries from Carcass, and to be really honest with you, while I enjoyed Surgical Steel, I don't think it was nearly their greatest material. And again, I thought it was good, but I didn't think it was that fantastic. I think I got a little bit rated a little too highly for its own good, even though I thought it was a very solid comeback album after Swan Song from the mid-90s there, and it was a fine album. But Torn Arteries, I think has surpassed Surgical Steel. This is a really good fucking death metal album. This is really good. At times you can tell they're really mixing in more of at least almost a crossbreed between Heartwork and Swan Song, but they're still mixing a lot of the heavier portions of some of those albums, and I think if anything it just makes this so great. There's a lot of hooks on this album. There's a lot of great guitar riffs playing, everything on here. They sound fucking solid on this album. I think if anything, it's some of the finest sounds I think Carcass has released. So it's up there. I really fucking loved Torn Arteries. So there we go. That's at number 3. Coming in number 2 is Sky Destroyer from Midnight Spell. These guys again are an American heavy metal band. It's their debut full-length album. But oh my god, is this not fucking infectious? This is what a debut heavy metal album in the modern day is supposed to be like. It is the overall feel you're supposed to get. It's just so goddamn catchy. You can tell that they've got something. They got a lot of great qualities to them. They know how to write songs. They know how to write hooks. They can write melodies. They can write all sorts of stuff. And again, this is really early into their career, but they've already are establishing that these guys are going to be a very much a solid band from now on. And this is, I think, was a really good debut album. And again, if you want to hear my more of my thoughts on this one, again, where I elaborate more, just go and find my review for this album, because it came out earlier this year, but it's so good. So if you want to hear more of me talk about this album, just find my review. It's good. So there we go. Finally, at number 1, it might be the most surprising one, because it's not something you're going to expect. This is why I decided to title this video as NMP's Top 10 Metal Albums of 2021. because this is my list. So what you would come to expect, what you would think would be number one, I've already went through. So what is going to be number one here is going to be one of those that's going to be very surprising, but to be quite honest, it's the one that's really impressed me the most. And it's actually more of a comeback album too. It is the comeback album from Axe Switch with Out of the Ashes Into the Fire. Oh my god, this is so good. I was really surprised by the overall quality on here. I mean, last year, another band that was in the sort of same, at least, I would say kind of close to at least, I guess the overall popularity of Axe Switch was Torch. They released an album last year titled Reignited that I thought was a very good album. I thought it was a really good comeback album. But Axe Switch, I think, released a comeback album I think at times surpasses the overall quality of Reignited. At the same time, I think even at times surpasses some of the ones that I've really enjoyed on this list. I think it's one of those where it just was so surprising to me because of they weren't the most technically efficient band, even though I enjoyed some of their earlier albums. Again, I own one of their albums, that being Lord of the Flies, or the Lord of Flies, actually. Again, they were a Swedish metal band, and they were on Fingerprint Records, which had bands like, I think, like Gotham City and other sort of really obscure Swedish metal bands. But they weren't the most technically gifted band. They were very raw at times. You can tell maybe it's kind of sloppy, but they still had at least a good charm to them that I enjoyed. It still sounded at least somewhat organic and human. But this right out of here, I think, if anything, surpasses some of those albums. I think it Out of the Ashes Into the Fire probably sounds like the most mature album from these guys, and I think, if anything, it might be some of their best material. And that's because, again, musically, everything's more tighter on this album. They come off like a more well-seasoned band. It's just, there are so many good songs on this album. I think the riff-wise and even vocally, he even comes he sounds the same, but I think he just sounds a lot more enthusiastic on here. He just sounds like he's having fun with these songs. Everyone sounds great. It's got really good mixture of being very heavy and very doomy, but also very, very rock, and at times bring up at least some similarities or nostalgicness of bands like Diamond Head or some of the other new wave or British heavy metal bands. You know, it just has that caliber on this album, and I think that they knocked it out of the park with this one. And here for bonuses, they re-recorded 2 songs, which would be the song Axe Switch and Nightmare, and they sound even better than I think the ones they recorded earlier. Even though I love the earlier versions, it's got a certain charm to them that I enjoy. But you can tell they were trying to perfect what they were establishing early on. I think everything just sounds fucking tight on this album, and it's just a really good album. It's actually my favorite metal album of 2021. So there we go. There it is, folks. Alright, well, that was another end of the year list that has been set in stone. We'll see what the year 2022 brings us. So with that, if you have any thoughts on any of these albums, even the ones that I've honorably mentioned, you can, whether it be, you know, positive or negative, you can leave them in the comment section below. So with that, this is Heavy Thrasher saying, I am out, and happy holidays.